And one of the issues is what you mentioned, the fact that over the last several years we have been unable to expand our higher educational opportunities. That's due to several reasons. For the last I think the 30-40 years, our investment in education has been dropping rapidly to a point where we are spending less than 2% of GDP on education as a whole.
Ideally, how much would you like to spend?
Ideally, UNESCO recommendation is a minimum of 6%. 6% of GDP on education is the UNESCO mandated ideal.
Right.
We are nowhere close, and we haven't been anywhere close for several decades now.
Probably then, Doctor, why that only 2 Sri Lankan universities make that recently put out ranking, the world ranking, out of 1,488 universities. We had the University of Peradeniya at 450 and the University of Colombo, not to be mixed up with the Open University of Sri Lanka, but that was also somewhere quite down the list, about between 1,000 and 1,100.
Yes.
So, and none of the others, Jaffna, nowhere, nobody else made the list.
Well, yes, funding is one of the reasons, but the universities have been facing far more than just a funding issue.
Right.
Don't forget that for the last 30 years or so, we've also had a severe brain drain.
Yeah.
Right? And we are also, unfortunately, if you look at even regionally, our ability to retain the best people within the university system has been not great, because
probably something to do with the per capita GDP.
Yes, per capita, and also very, very basic things like employment conditions and salaries, which are very much lower regionally for university staff. So this was one of the reasons why in 2011 and 2012 the University Teachers Union, FUTA, Federation of University Teachers Association, if you remember, in 2011 and 2012 had a big campaign, and one of their main points was about improving the salaries of university academics in order to attract and retain the best people within the university system. So this is also an issue, and that's also again linked to funding, but that's not, I mean, these are all sort of interconnected issues.
Your past indicates a certain activism.
Yes.
On various issues, especially women's issues and education, things that are sort of close to your liking. And therefore, the matter rather puzzles me why it is that you've chosen to lend your services, your input to a party, however well-intentioned it may be, is not quite going to make a difference in Parliament.
No, well, very good question. My association with the JVP, which is part of the National People's Power, the NPP, right? NPP consists of several groups, of which the JVP is the main political party. But my association with the JVP actually started as a result of my activism on education. So when we were I found members of the JVP very receptive to the ideas that we discussed. They were able to understand some of the issues that we were raising. They responded very positively. And they also gave us an opportunity to be involved in drafting an education policy for the NPP.
Right.
So if you look at the subject that is one of the subjects that's closest to my heart, as you mentioned, education, I am very much in favor of the education policy that the NPP has put together, also because I was one of the members who drafted that policy. So I felt that this is the party that I can work with on the issues that I believe in, and be able to actually work on issues that I find meaningful. That, and also their policy on women, both of which are very, very progressive.
Yes, and how do you feel about that? 53% of the population are females in our country, and a tiny amount of that are represented in Parliament.
Yeah, it's shocking.
It is, isn't it?
It is shocking. It's something we should be ashamed about.
Right.
And I think we have an opportunity this time to change things. I think...
that's my point, see. Why didn't you choose one of the mainstream parties?
Because I don't believe that they are committed or I think you have to be with a group of people with whom you have shared values, right? I mean, politics is not simply being in a position of power without any principles, without ideology.
But in practical terms, Dr. Amarasuriya, how are you going to, no matter what you say, and let's say that the NPP make enough, get enough votes, and they're able to offer you a slot on the national list, then how are you going to make a change?
Well, change doesn't happen overnight. This is a battle that we are in for the long haul, right? I think things in this country are not going to change with one election. The kinds of policies that we are trying to implement are not going to be immediately possible. It is also important that people get to know what we are about, people get to know what the NPP stands for, and the kinds of ideas and the principles and the ideology that it's trying to put forward. Commitment. And I think you can't also measure the impact of a group or a political movement purely by its results at an electoral, within an electoral system. I think the JVP and the NPP have been able to have a much wider influence on how people think and on raising issues that are important for the society, which are not often reflected in the votes that it gets.
But Dr. Amarasuriya, when you say that, I'm thinking back now, and we had President Mahinda Rajapaksa, doing a transaction with the JVP at the time.
2004.
Yes, and then he got elected, only very famously to be outed by WikiLeaks, who then revealed through one of the cables sent by the US Embassy that he had quite candidly told them, look, I know what to tell them before the election and I know how to handle them after the election, meaning that he told them a little bit of a lie, a pokey pie, just to get their help. So I suppose they feel terribly put out by it all. But in that same way, don't you think that by having a fractured, splintered opposition, that isn't there a danger that we may be playing in to a government that in the past has been accused of being gravely authoritarian in nature? And really, it's not their fault because the opposition's all fractured.
Well, you know what? For the longest time in this country, I think we have been following this logic.
Yeah.
Right? Sort of either uniting to that, you sort of choose the lesser of the two evil in the hope of ousting the greater evil. And then you end up with a situation where you realize there's actually not much of a difference between the two evils.
Right.
And I think we learned that at a tremendous cost in 2015, right? And look where it has got us. So I think it's time we started doing things differently and realize that we cannot expect these established mainstream parties to fulfill the kinds of changes that people want.
The
to
SJB,
do that,
what about the SJB? They're a newish party, aren't they?
newish,
Well,
old in a new bottle, right? I mean, what is the
new.
difference? You look at the people who are in the SJB, these are the same faces, the same personalities that were in Parliament before as well.
Not all. Some of them are left behind.
Some of them have been left behind in the other version of it.
Yeah.
But you look at even
And it's the same with the
ideology.
SLFP.
Same with the SLFP,
We've got the
of course.
SLFP and now we've got the SLPP.
Yeah. So that's precisely what I'm saying. So people have been yearning for a change.
But however much they've been yearning, if you look at the statistics, and like if you look at the numbers, for example, the JVP, for example, their candidate at the presidential election he polled about 500,000.
Yeah.
And they were over the moon about it.
Yeah.
They said, oh, look, this is the highest figures we've got.
Yeah.
Sorry, but it's not enough. It didn't even make a dent.
Yeah, it's not enough, right? And I think a presidential election is always a very not a very good election for a party like the JV, where there's, you know, it's one person wins or loses. I think in a parliamentary system it's different. It's not about a person winning or losing. It is about a party, right? So electing more members from a particular party. So I think in that sense, the parliamentary election is a much better field for a party like the NPP to appear on, rather than a president. But we use the presidential election also to introduce the NPP, to introduce the policies of the NPP, and to make the NPP known to the people.
Right.
Right? So for us, it's a long-term process. We are in this for the long haul. This is not some sort of thing where we are, and for us, politics is not just about elections.
Right.
It's also about working with people.
We do that all the time here at Newsfirst.
Excellent.
But on that note, we need to go for a short break. Don't go away. After all, this is Newsline Live, and we will be back after this small break.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly. Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.
And welcome back to Newsline Live. We're in conversation with Dr. Harini Amarasuriya, who's from the senior lecturer from the Open University of Sri Lanka. And thank you for all your questions, 0772 300 305. And I take this question, it's two parts. Can you kindly brief us on the education policy of the NPP of which you are involved? Also, in what way has the NPP been instrumental in being a catalyst on the national education policy, besides instigating student unrest for the betterment of the JVP political requirement? Wow, okay, so I'll stop there and I'll take the second part in a minute.
So first one first?
Yes, yes, why not?
Okay, so the education policy of the NPP was developed based on consultations that we did with the public over a period of 2 to 3 months. There were about 10, 12 of us who did these consultations and came up with the policy. And our policy is actually a complete overhaul, a radical change to the existing education system. Our greater focus is actually on general education, because we think that the school system needs a severe change, even if we are before we can think of what higher education looks like. So one of the things that we are proposing is that we want to have a mixed school system where schools will not be divided based on ethnicity, language, or gender. We want to take a focus away from exam-oriented education to a much more practical, experiential form of education. So, for instance, we are proposing that up to a grade 8 or 9, that students will not be sitting for formal examinations, that there will be other alternative assessments. We are also proposing that students will have much more flexibility in their choice of subjects, so that they are not sort of forced to kind of fit into a particular kind of track too early in their lives. We want to bring in sexual and reproductive health education right from an early age. We want to bring in reforms to how religion is taught in education system, so that children are exposed to all religions, so that understanding of diversity, plurality, pluralism becomes much more a part of the education system.
What chances of Sri Lanka actually achieving that?
Well, vote us into power and you will see us do that.
Right.
That's what we have pledged.
And have you independently identified perhaps that the public mood is now changing and perhaps a bit more receptive to the NPP ideology?
Well, I think it's shifting, but I can tell you this. I think there's a huge yearning among the public for change, and I think there's a huge yearning in the public in terms of well, let me talk specifically about the education sector. When we went around the country talking to people about education, education is no longer something of enjoyment or relief or happiness for anybody concerned, not the student, not the parents, not the teachers. It's become such a burden on people that, I mean, it's very clear that people want change, right? Whether they think the NPP is the party to make that kind of change is, we need to see, right? But it's up to us, our work, that is how effectively we are able to put our message across, that will hopefully convince people that this is that we are the change that they are seeking.
I see. Now then, the second part of the question. The second part of that question is unfortunately garbled. So somebody's typing so fast they haven't got it right. 0772 300 305. The JVP policy cannot be understood at grassroots level, the people who are at the grassroots. Perhaps that's why they're not engaging with the JVP. Maybe a re-evaluation is required. Do you agree?
Yes and no. I don't think it's a lack of understanding at the grassroots level. I think that's not quite how I see it. I think in a way the kinds of things that we are talking about don't give immediate relief to people, right? So it's for people who are struggling with immediate kind of issues, it might become...
They want their Samurdhi money now, not in 8 months.
We are proposing that Samurdhi is something in our economic policy, for example. We are proposing that Samurdhi is something that should eventually not be there because people wouldn't need Samurdhi.
Another question.
Yeah.
Somebody's asking, have you all got the NPP, have you got a policy document like a action plan how to up the university or the higher education system in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, we launched our manifesto with the different policies on each of those sectors during the presidential election in 2019, and that is what we are still standing by. So that document is available, and it has detailed policy recommendations and actions for very many sectors, including education.
Well, we've got somebody complaining about the level of the audio quality. Perhaps the control room can attend to that problem whilst we've got a few more minutes left. Now then, how are we going to find the money to do all this? That's the other thing.
Yeah, well,
because our economy is 1,800 billion revenue,
so that's,
1,200 recurrent expenditure, 900 billion for the interest component, 2.1, minus 300. Where is the money to do everything else?
Yeah, so that is going to be one of the most serious challenges that any government will face in the very near future. And as you know, the COVID pandemic is not going to make it any easier, right? But I think one of the things that needs to happen is to have a disciplined government as well, right? Where you're not sort of, I mean, that has to be one of the major concerns.
So you need a disciplined government, disciplined fiscal management.
Disciplined fiscal management, and fiscal management and a monetary policy is that's not just based on sort of
robbing the central bank.
Robbing the central bank or just sort of pandering to popular notions, but one that is properly managed.
Right.
Right, and not just thinking in terms of winning an election. Right.
And lining their own pockets.
And lining their own pockets. So I think a government that is zero tolerant on corruption, on waste, and has a long-term strategy is essential. And I think we have to face the fact that neither of our mainstream parties has delivered on that, on any of those.
The NEWSLINE live program gets shorter and shorter every day, which we need to really address. But anyway, Dr. Harini Amorsuri, thank you very much for popping in to NEWSLINE.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's entirely our pleasure, honestly, because we believe in representing the people's interests, and we try and do it as much as we can. and we have been doing it for over 21 years with Sirasa and so on. Thank you. Good luck with the oncoming election process, and we look forward to welcoming you on our network yet again.
Thank you very much.
And that's the way it was, folks, on this shortened edition of Newsline Live. We'll wish you a very good evening, and sorry about the audio quality. We'll look into that too. In the meantime, have a great evening, and of course, God bless.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.